Hello, I'm Helen Bradley. Welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can process an image that's really quite light and where you want to get some detail back into a light subject that has a fairly light background behind it. In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can process an image like this. It has a very narrow tonal range. Here, most of the detail in this image is in these lights and sort of mid-grays. And I'm going to show you how you can take an image like this and make it into something like this, where there's a lot more lights and whites in the bird. We've managed not to create too much of a lightness in the background, but everything's looking just a whole lot more attractive. This is where we're going to start, and this is where we're going to end up. Here's our starter image, and it's pretty much just out of the camera. The only thing I've done to it is to crop some of the mess away from the outer edges, but essentially this is the image that I started with. Now it's a DNG image, which is a digital negative file, so we've got a fair bit of area that we can move in processing this image. So I'm going to start with the basic panel here, and I'm just going to start with white balancing this image. So I'm going to click on the white balance selector, and I'm going to punt that this bird's feathers are probably something in the white range. So I'm just going to click on these and find a good point to white balance to. Now I've added a little bit more blue into the image, and that's fine for me for now. Now we're going to look at the exposure, and here is all the detail in the midtones. So I'm going to increase the exposure and start to lighten this image and get a little bit better exposure for printing this image. But as you can see, what's happened as I've done that is that the background is blowing out. We've lost contrast in the bird to a certain extent, and everything's looking overly light. Well, it's looking overly light because all the detail is up here. Let's now look at contrast, because your first impression might be that you need more contrast, but I've actually found that quite often less contrast will actually help bring some detail into some of these areas once you combine it with some other tools. With highlights and whites, I want to bring down the whites a little bit and bring down the highlights a little bit so that I can open up some of these shadow areas, and also increase some of the blacks just a little bit. So right now all we've got is a narrowing of this area, this tonal range, but we can start to bring back some of the detail by increasing clarity. And clarity is giving us a crispness, so we can see some of the detail, for example, in the bird's feathers. And vibrance will bring back a little bit of color into the image. Now in Lightroom 5 you can increase clarity and vibrance more than you would have been able to in other versions of Lightroom, because these sliders have had an adjustment made to the underlying technology. I'm also going to kick up saturation just a little bit. Now let's look at the tone curve, because the tone curve allows us to isolate areas of the image and to build contrast into those areas. By default we have a linear curve, which is really just a straight line. I'm going to select strong contrast because that's going to boost the contrast in the image. The problem is that while it's dragged down on the shadows here, so we're deepening the shadow areas and lightening the lighter areas, it's actually also lightened a bit through these early midtones. But I can fix that by grabbing the targeted adjustment tool, and let's go to these areas of the image, this sort of water area behind the bird, and I'm just going to drag down on it. And that's going to allow me to darken the colors here by just clicking and dragging downwards. I'm dragging down on the curve in the area that is the water, and then if I go to the bird, you can see the bird is subtly a little bit higher up on the curve here, particularly these lighter feathers, and so I can drag up on those to just lighten them a little bit. So I'm getting a sort of bendy tone curve here because I'm able to isolate areas of the image that I want to adjust and limit my adjustment to just a very narrow area of the tone curve. I'm going to say that I'm done there, so let's finish off now with the adjustment brush. So I'm going to click on the adjustment brush, I'm going to click on new. I'm going to take my exposure back to 0 because I don't want to see it right now, and I want auto mask on because I'm going to look at this bird's face. I also want to look at the size of my brush and just increase it a little bit. The reason why I've got auto mask on is because this bird's face is going to be fairly easy to isolate from the background. So I'm just going to click once here in this area that I'm going to fix, and now I'm just going to paint over this area. Now it's really hard to see what I have selected, so I'm going to click Show Selected Mask Overlay and just make sure that I'm picking up these areas. If I go too far, I'll hold the Alt key, which will allow me to switch to the eraser tool, so I would erase those areas. I think I would appreciate a fairly high feather on this brush just to blend this fix into this area here. So I'm just going to feather off the bottom edge of that. When I'm happy with the selection that I've made, I'm going to turn off my mask overlay, and now I can adjust the bird's head in isolation of the background, so I'm only affecting this area. I'm going to reduce the contrast a little bit because this part of the bird's face was in shadow, and I just want to get some of that shadow out of there. I can do that by increasing the shadows, by increasing the exposure, and decreasing the contrast a little bit. I'm going to click Done. Now I want to look at the bird's beak and legs, but I can do that elsewhere. Right now, before I finish, I'm going to go to the bird's eye. So I'm going to move all the way in here so that I can see the eye very clearly. I'm actually going to go to a 4:1 view of the image so I can get right into this eye area. I'm going to target the adjustment brush, click here to make the pin point for it, and then just drag around the pupil of this bird's eye. Having got that, I'm now going to zoom out because I want to see my fix in context, but I'm going to turn my pin off by selecting Never so that I can see the area I'm fixing. We know that this is the area selected, so I can increase the exposure just a little bit here in the eye, perhaps give it a bit more clarity and a bit more saturation so that any color at all that is there, we're going to be able to see. And when I'm done, I'm going to reselect my pin, set it to auto, and click Done. Let's go now and look at the legs and the beak. Now, typically I would fix the legs and the beak with the adjustment brush if there were other areas in the image that were these same colors, but they're not. These are the only red and yellow areas in the image. So I'm going here to Hue, Saturation, Lightness, and I'm actually going to click on Color. I just want to isolate right now the oranges, so I'm just going to click on Orange, and this is the area of the image that the beak is in, I think. Well, I can test that by just marching this color around. The hue is an easy way to isolate whether this is in actual fact the color that you're working with. And because it's changing as I drag this slider, that's telling me that this beak is really orange. It's not yellow, it's actually orange. I'm going to double click on the word hue now to reset that because I want to leave it where it is in terms of its hue, but I'm going to increase its saturation and perhaps slightly decrease its luminance just to make it a little bit more dark. And now let's look at the legs because I think that they're probably in the red area. We'll go to red and let's test it. Well, every time I drag this hue slider, you can see that it's actually affecting the legs. So that's telling me that a lot of the color in this bird's legs are in the red channel, but they may also be in the magenta channel. So let's just check that. Well, they're less in magenta than they were in red. Let's go back to red because that appears to be the area that is the bird's leg. And now I can adjust the hue. If I want to take it to a little bit more pink, I could go a little bit towards orange. But I could also just adjust the saturation. So I'm just going to take the hue back to 0, but increase the saturation in the bird's legs. So I'm increasing the saturation, making the red a bit redder. And if I decrease the luminance, then I'm going to make it a bit darker. To see how far we've come with the image, I'm going to press the backslash key, and this is the starting point, the before, and this is the fix that we have to date. Now the only thing that I'm thinking is probably going to improve this image is the very slightest little bit of a vignette, because that's going to darken the edges and again enhance the differentiation between the water and the bird, and we'll do that through the effects panel. So I'm going to choose a highlight priority post crop vignette here. Dragging to the right will lighten the edges. I actually want to drag to the left to darken them slightly. So this is going to be a very small vignette. It's only a -10 setting. I'm going to leave everything else adjusted to its default. Midpoint is 50, roundness is 0, and feather is 50. And let's just see the result of that with the backslash key. This is the before and this is the after, and if we want to see just what this vignette effect is doing, I'm going to click here. That's the before on the vignette, that's the after on the vignette. It's just darkening the edges a little bit, making the bird stand out just a little bit. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial. Look out for more video tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.